we did not go legally. Had we read our contract or our agreement, we would have known that they were in breach of the contract, right? But we went around it and we did something we should not have done. And as a result, they sued us. And after all that was said and done in arbitration, we lost. And there was $1 million settlement to pay their legal bills. I mean, the settlement was probably $10, but the legal bills were ridiculous because that's the way it was. So here we are, no money, and we have $1 million settlement. And I'm literally days away from understanding that this is the end of my business because I don't have the money. I've already taken a line of credit out on my house to pay the employees, right? So I have no money. I have nowhere to get $1 million. I'm screwed.
Welcome to Beyond the Fail, the podcast where we talk to leaders and entrepreneurs about their biggest business failures. We'll deep dive into how they overcame these setbacks, the lessons they learned from them, all to help you gain valuable insights. Failure is an essential part of the business journey, as well as being the key to success. So we're here to show you how to thrive from it.
Henry, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good, Jeremy. Thanks. A little under the weather, but besides that, I'm just happy to be here.
You don't sound it, so I think you obviously, whatever you're taking, you're doing well. Henry, you've got quite a fascinating kind of CV. Would you describe yourself as an entrepreneur?
Oh, without a doubt. I think more of a hedonistic and opportunistic entrepreneur, basically meaning I try to follow and do things that I want to do, that I like. And if that's not the case, if an opportunity were to present itself and I see that, it could be fortuitous, then I'll take the dive.
Has it always been that way though? Have you always identified as an entrepreneur, would you say, from an early age? At 13, I went to Mexico for a swimming meet. I was a swimmer, and I came back with a switchblade. And in junior high, the kids were fascinated, and they go, "Oh my God!" And I'm like, "Oh, hey, you know what?" I flew back as a 13-year-old by myself to Mexico City, bought small and large switchblades to sell them in junior high. Now, mind you, this is 1973, so you could do this kind of stuff, right? But I wouldn't have thought of it then. I was just saying, look, hey, here's an opportunity to make a little bit of money, impress my friends, be the, big kid on campus, right? And, moving forward in college, I'm sitting in a laundromat at the time, the late 70s. I'm addicted to Pac-Man. And I end up thinking this laundromat needs a Pac-Man or a video game because, I'm sitting here with a pocket full of quarters, right? And so I go back, instead of thinking, well, somebody should really do something, right? I call every laundromat in Tucson, where I went to college in Arizona, and I asked them if they had video games, and they all said no. And so I figured, let me ask a couple, would you like one? And a couple said yes. And so by the time I graduated college, I had video games in laundromats around Tucson because that was ironically, it was because I wanted to play video games in a laundromat. And then I couldn't even play my own games because every time I went in and somebody was playing, I couldn't take away from my revenue to play the game, So that was another opportunity I just did it because it was something that I felt was missing or I needed, that I wanted to do. And, hey, there was money there as well. How did that video game business go? What was the kind of trajectory of that?
So it went fairly well. I jokingly say I bought my first BMW with quarters, but what I did was, like most young kids, I don't really realize that I should save and put money away for investment. I spent most of it on stupid things. I did end up selling the business as I left for LA. And instead of giving me a lump sum, I said, for the next 2 years, give me like $1,000 a month, right? So I can at least survive if I can't find a work in LA, right? So it kind of paid me out in annuities, which was great for the new owners because they too, they got a little bit of money every time they'd send me some, and it all worked out. So it wasn't a windfall, but it was certainly a little bit to keep me out of trouble.
But that's quite advanced, M&A
tactic, isn't it? You've essentially, you found a buyer and you've structured a deal, and they're essentially giving you, they're paying you out of future income. That's how people buy businesses, no money down, and things like that. So, was that just like a gut feeling of how to structure that deal? Did you get any advice on that? Like, it's quite advanced, right, for a 21-year-old?
Right? I don't even think I was that smart. I think it was just because the buyers didn't have the funds up front. And since I figured, well, you know what, in that case, just pay it over time. In hindsight, it was the greatest thing I could have done for myself. Even though when I went to LA and I looked for work, I ended up on a game show and I won money on a game show too. So, luck kind of followed me around. But in hindsight, I probably thought, had they paid me, I probably would have done and spent it and I've been broke again in a couple of months. So it is what it is.
So it was the smartest thing all around then, really, to protect you and to protect, protect your money. And where did that entrepreneurial sort of, I suppose, sensibility come from?
I got to be honest. I don't know that I can look back and say, this is the time that I realized, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, right? It was sort of, my dad was fairly entrepreneurial. He had his little business. My grandparents were all working for, actually one of my grandfathers is also entrepreneurial. So I kind of saw that. And then growing up in the 60s in the US, you kind of believe that these things are possible and easy, right? You don't realize the effort it takes. You just kind of think, oh yeah, of course I can do that, right? And you do, without knowing failure. And as you're younger, failure doesn't mean you're going to fall very far, right? I mean, not like I have a house and a family and mortgages and car payments. I don't have anything, right? So if I fail, what's the worst that can happen? I sleep on somebody's couch. I was probably doing that half the time anyway.
Yeah, so the stakes are much lower.
Yeah. You don't have a lot. You don't have a lot to lose.
You said an interesting thing there, that you said, the 60s, the getting started in business felt easy. Sort of fast forward into today, and I hear, people, Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, Gary V said, I saw a video of him the other day saying, we've got it the best we've ever had. And he's talking about everything in the world. But particularly in terms of the internet and the opportunities that brings to start an online business and how easy it is. But you've said it was easy in the 60s. What made it easy? And was that a kind of mindset thing, or, how does that compare to today?
Well, to be clear, I didn't start a business in the 60s. That's when I was born in 1960. So yeah, my sort of insights when you said, where did it start? Probably as a kid and seeing the world in, the 60s and the 70s, the switchblades happened in 1973. But I think that because the mindset is important nowadays with the internet, now there's tons of opportunity, but man, word travels quickly, right? So there's a lot more competition. There's a lot more, I don't know if it's access, but stepping on other people's toes and you go, oh, there's a great idea. I'm going to do it here, or I'm going to copy it. Or, you see somebody else in another country, let's say here, or somebody in China goes, oh, I'm going to make it cheaper here. Every day now. I don't know if you would see, or that would have happened in the 60s or 70s when there wasn't the spread of information via the internet within seconds,
So less competition, but obviously the less competition means that, you have more competition now because you've got more accessibility. So, there's some advantages and disadvantages, isn't there?
That's exactly right. And not only that, I think the gestation period for the expectation of the business, when you'd see businesses in the 60s and 70s, they were around for decades and they didn't spring up and, like an OpenAI, they're a couple of years old and they're worth a gazillion dollars, right? Most of the big tech companies now, they were here for a few decades and now they're trillion-dollar companies. That happened back in the 60s and 70s. It was a slower path. So I think now the expectation start it, build it, grow, scale fast, throw a ton of money at it and expect it's going to be big or fail. There's like two options, which, doesn't always work.
No. So would you say that who in your family was your sort of first mentor or most impactful mentor, would you say?
I'm going to probably say my dad. He was free spirit, travel around at his advertising business and travel, wrote books and, archaeological stuff. So he was pretty much that's the way to live your life. That was the inspiration.
And is that where some of the, you're obviously a big traveler as well, and that you mentioned the word you used the word hedonism earlier. Is that, some influence there?
Without a doubt. Yeah. When you travel in your youth and you continue to travel, you realize the beauty and the gratitude that we in this country, in America, and probably the UK as well, realize how much we have that we should be grateful for, and it's not always obvious when you don't leave the country and you sit in your little bubble and you think the world is like this, and it's not. So I think that traveling helps us expand and think differently and see and appreciate what we have as well.
Yeah, I was thinking of the word gratitude when you were talking, actually, And what did your dad teach you about business?
What not to do. He was not very organized with respect to processes and procedures. I don't think he didn't care as much about the money part of it. He was just having fun. He would trade intellectual property. Hey, I'll give you this and you give me an airline ticket and I'll just go and travel and have fun, right? So he didn't really get to the whole, how do you really make this an ongoing concern that makes money, right? And that has a moat. But he was good with relationships, but I don't think he was good with money.
Is that down to like knowledge, confidence, like him not having, for example, a group of peers around him who are also doing businesses, or a lack of sort of mentors?
I think it's also the time as well, being a product of his era, in the college and growing up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, white guy, US, you have your network of people, you work with other people you work with, you do deals with them. It's easy to do so. It didn't seem, at least I didn't know the inner workings of his day to day, but it didn't seem like there was a lot of stress that, oh my God, I'm going to fail, or I need this client, like it appears there is now.
Yeah. And obviously, there's less resources and, YouTube channels and books that, none of that. I mean, obviously there was some business books, but obviously nowhere near the amount, for example, you've got now. So let's fast forward a little bit. How did you kind of get started in kind of, I know you worked in TV. How did you go from laundromat video games to TV?
Yeah, well, since I was 16, I kind of knew I wanted to get into film, television production. I went to college studying radio, television. I graduated. I moved to Los Angeles with the idea that I would get into film and television production as a director or producer. And of course, that didn't happen. But I ended up working on a travel film as what's called a PA, a production assistant. And, eventually after several years, I worked my way through and sound guy and, producer, and I'm producing travel films, usually for tourist boards and governments and stuff. And so it ends up after a decade of traveling around that you get tired of traveling. You're like, man, I got to settle down. I can't be on a plane every week and I need my own bed, right? And so one of the places we shot in Latin America was Chile. And it went from a democracy. It went from a dictatorship to a democracy with Pinochet. So this is now late 80s, early 90s. And so that is the opportunity part. So I say, wow. So they now have new television stations and a new network. And what do they need? They need content. And since I knew a production company down there, since we used them for support services, I said, set me up a meeting with the new network and I'm going to come down as this quote unquote American producer and pitch a game show. And I did. I ripped off an idea from a show in the US. And next thing you know, we're on the air pitching, doing a game show in Chile called Machos for the younger generation.
Well, what TV show influenced it and what was your version of it?
Yeah, so when I was in LA, I had mentioned that I was on a game show called Press Your Luck. And the associate producer there eventually went on to produce another show called Studs. And so years later, he calls me up and he says, listen, I've got this game show. It's called Studs. And I'm like, no way. I am not going on a show called Studs. How? No. He goes, no, you don't understand. We set you up on blind dates. We pay for everything. I'm like, what? You pay for everything? Blind dates? Okay, I'm in. And so, of course, the idea came from Studs, where you would get set up on blind dates. We had students in Chile that would, psychology students, that would pair up the two contestants. I mean, there were multiple contestants, and they'd set them up on blind dates. Then they'd come back and they'd sit in the studio and the host would say, listen, one of the girls said, tight pants, tight butt, ooh la la. Okay, who said that, right? And so you have to figure out which one said it. If you win, you get a point, which is a heart, right? And the contestant with the most hearts at the end wins, and they get another date and some fancy little trip and money with their, woman that they picked, right? And that was the show was called Machos, which was like a direct ripoff of Studs.
Amazing. And how long did that, show for?
Well, it went on for about a year and a half. It was the number one show for the demographics at the time. And then what it was Studs was packaged in Spain with another bunch of Fox shows like The Simpsons and Beverly Hills 90210, I think it was. And they came and they go, wait a second, you got a show just like that. Unless you remove that show, we're not selling this package. And so I was axed. That was the end of the show. So, rightfully so. I mean, I didn't get into any lawsuit. I don't think, IP, it's the expression of the idea, but, it was clearly, if you looked at it, clearly ripped off from that.
And was that the end of your TV career in Chile?
That's exactly right. But while I was there, somebody shows me a CD-ROM and I plug it into the computer and I look up and down all around at a virtual tour. And I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing ever. Oh my God, you don't even have to go there to look all around. This will change, my travel film days. I can travel now with just me and not the 5 guys and 17 pieces of luggage, just me and a camera and shoot virtual tours. So I then proceed to set up my next company, which was World Travel Vision, to do virtual tours of destinations and hotels, right? And that leads to, handing people CD-ROMs, and they would take them to trade shows and conferences to promote their destination or their hotel, right? And after a couple of years, now we're talking mid to late 90s, they start to ask, well, how do we put these virtual tours on this new World Wide Web thingy? I'm like, I don't know, send them a CD-ROM, right? And they'd say, yeah, there's no standard. I'm like, all right, well, yeah, let me see what I can do to help. Now, mind you, I know nothing about technology. I couldn't write a line of code if you put a gun to my head, right? So I thought, okay, well, let me see how we can help distribute virtual tours. So we start producing and distributing virtual tours. Then we realize as we look further into this, that virtual tours are nice to have, but photos are need to have, and photos are a problem because the old systems would give you the rate and the availability, but there were no pictures. So there were separate databases for the pictures, right? So we thought, all right, let's pivot from production of virtual tours to production and distribution of virtual tours to then photos, which is the need to have, because that's where the real value would be from a business perspective. And so we pivoted after several years to, and even changed the name to ICE Portal, Internet Content Exchange Portal, to help hotels mostly deliver photos to all of the major travel sites on the planet. That's how it ended up after 25 years, right? So we were a 25-year overnight success.
Just to explain that a little bit more then, so a couple of questions. Was that B2B business, were you getting paid essentially by the hotels to help distribute?
Well, originally it was a B2C, meaning the hotels was the client as not so much the consumer. We would produce virtual tours for hotels, mostly in the Caribbean and Mexico, right? And then we'd put them on travel sites. And then eventually we'd realize what a nightmare it was to call and try to sell individual hotels. And then if you did, then to collect the money from a hotel in Aruba or in Cancun. Oh man, what a pain in the butt. Why don't we go to the big groups, that have thousands of hotels, the management companies like Marriott or Wyndham, or the representation companies that have all these independent hotels. And so eventually we moved that as well, where we were a B2B, business to business enterprise, meaning the large companies like Wyndham, which has 9,700, or at least at the time had 9,700 hotels. So we'd sign one contract and we'd have, almost 10,000 hotels that would pay Wyndham. Wyndham would pay us as the intermediary to the service, that we'd pull it down from Wyndham's database and we'd send it to Expedia and Booking and literally everybody else on the planet.
Right. Okay. Yeah. A distribution as a site, really. I suppose it, it feels, because obviously you're talking about something that's 20 more than, 25 years old, aren't you? And obviously now you think, well, there must be an app that just connects the two things, to send.
No, even though we did this literally 25, 30 years ago, the challenge, most of the systems that give you the rate and availability, what's called the GDS, the Global Distribution Systems, they are still legacy systems. They do not have the capacity like they didn't. They probably started because they need to, but you still have multiple sites that have multiple standards, sizes and tags and coding, like room codes and hotel codes. All of them are different, right? So the system wasn't, hey, let me just take the picture of your room and send it to Expedia. Okay, what's the hotel ID? Okay, what room types do you have? And what does Expedia call it? Let's say you call it a standard room and Expedia calls it a superior. This happens all the time, right? Let's say it's packaged with, bed and breakfast, a breakfast, continental breakfast, and another, but it's the same room, or some has a honeymoon thing, and this needs a picture of a bottle of champagne, because if you do that in a room that doesn't have champagne, then somebody complains, wait, I saw the picture, it had champagne, where's my champagne, right? So there are a lot of those little idiosyncrasies that software did more than let me just send a picture to Expedia. And not just Expedia, it was, in Latin America and Africa and Europe and Asia, all of those travel sites from Ctrip in China to Booking in Europe, well, now it's here as well, to Decolocar in Brazil, all of those sites had the same needs. And for the hotel groups, they needed to maintain continuity and they needed control of their IP. Nobody could arbitrarily upload a picture that they may or may not have the rights to, which could create a whole nother, legal issue.
Right. Okay. So it sounds a lot more painful and complicated than I sort of imagined. Yeah. It still sounds like it's complicated and painful. And what sort of successes what early successes did you see in that? Was it a kind of instant, you pivoted and then you instantly got, these contracts with these big hotel chains?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? That was funny. I like your sense of humor, Jerry. That's good. So we pivoted to the virtual tour thing, and then we basically said, all right, let's get into supplying virtual tours. We partnered with a company in Europe, and they did the photos, and we did virtual tours. There was another company in Canada that did videos, and they also started in the photo business to compete with the European company. They raised a lot of venture capital money, and they ended up acquiring our partner in Europe, which meant that it was one group doing photos. They ended up signing exclusive deals with the GDSs, their 5-year deals, right? So we were essentially locked out. And one hotel group we were doing virtual tours for, that was Starwood, said, we like you guys, and you kind of see writing on the wall with this potential monopoly thing. Can you guys do photos? And, of course we lied and said, yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. And so we had to figure it out rather quickly. We didn't come to the realization, oh, photos is the opportunity. We knew it was, but we didn't want to step on our partner's toes. So what ended up happening was we had to hodgepodge a way to get their photos to things, including using the free version of our competitor's thing to get to the GDSs, right? So we had to manually do a lot of stuff for the 1,000 hotels for Starwood. And this happened over 5 years, right? In the process, I went back to school. I got my master's in entrepreneurship. I read some books. I said, all right, if we have a business here and the opportunity presents itself and these exclusives end, how do I need to best position myself, right? So we would also ask the hotel groups, all right, listen, I know it's exclusive. When your contracts end, by the way, right? And what's not working for you? I mean, what would you like to see happen? And we would continually stay in touch. We'd see them at trade shows. We would trade our photographers at trade shows for pictures for the trade show so we could just be there and talk to the clients. So we knew all along the way what the challenges were for many of the hotel groups. And then when the exclusives ended, we went from, Starwood, 1,000 hotels to 22,000, in less than a year. So we exploded once the exclusives ended because we built the system and prepared for that day.
Again, spotting the opportunity, which obviously you seem to be very adept at. I suppose just a sort of logistical question. Did you have to take the actual photos of those 22,000 hotels, or no, they were already supplied?
No, and in reality, listen, it could have gone a completely different direction. Had we asked the right questions and they gave us the answers and they were happy with the competitor and what they were doing and the service they were getting, they would never have switched, because it's very, very difficult to switch and change the integrations from one provider to another. So we kind of positioned ourselves to take advantage of people who were not happy with the competitor. Had the competitor had half a brain and said, listen, we're in a good position, don't ignore and monopolize and take advantage of our clients, right? But in answer to your question, we, now I forgot the question.
I was saying, did you have to take your own photos? Because obviously 22,000 hotels of photos. I'm like, that's a lot of logistics.
No, it would be impossible. We never took the pictures of the hotel photos. We took the virtual tours because they were specialized, but the photos were generally done by an approved vendor for that brand. They would upload it to the database of the management company or the representation company because they're the ones who held it, right? And then once they approved it, because they have their standards as well, and they need here, do you have a contract? You own the rights to these images and stuff like that. Once all of that was cleared, then it was released to us, and we would pull it down from their database on a daily basis with what's called deltas, new, different, or deleted. And so every day we'd find new pictures and we'd have to then send them out. But we only got pictures that were taken by other people. It would be logistically impossible to have photographers all over.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. What made you do that MBA at that point in your career? Because obviously, that was, 20 years since you started at the beginning?
Yeah, that was probably the awareness of my lacking. When I went to college, I don't remember a lot of what I learned, to be honest with you, except, drinking and debauchery. But I didn't take a lot of business classes because I thought I was going to get into radio, TV and do creative stuff. And so then I thought, what really happened was when I started my company, I gave a presentation to a local group of CEOs, and around the room, this was at a university, there were a bunch of MBA students. And I'm looking around thinking, man, do I have imposter syndrome? Because I'm trying to tell these kids what the hell I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. And they are getting MBAs. They must know more than I do. So I thought, I should go back and I should get my MBA and I should learn, which was great because many of the students were there because they wanted a degree so that they can graduate and get more money for whatever they do, right? And I wanted to apply everything I was learning day to day, lean management and things like that. I would apply to my business like immediately. So it was like very fortuitous for me, learning along the way, getting books, reading and going, yeah, so that's what KPI means. I didn't even know that, right?
Oh, so yeah, that's what they say in the hire the best people. It's not the most, because people would say you need to hire the right people. Like, I can't even afford to pay myself. And then they'd say, you need to get the culture right. And like, I don't know what that means. How do you do that? What's culture? What? I had no idea about any of these things. So I figured either I'm going to learn and be prepared when the opportunity, presents itself, when those exclusives end, or I'll be, asking you if you want fries with that burger, because I didn't have a plan B.
Not every leader would do that. I think, you mentioned a couple of things. One, you said the word imposter syndrome. Not everyone would potentially mention or even want to admit that they have imposter syndrome. It's particularly, at a critical stage in your career, and particularly as you're not at the beginning of your career. And obviously it's quite, it's quite humble to admit, I need to improve as a leader. I need to learn more in order to take this company to the next level. Why did you have that, I suppose, attitude and mindset?
I'm probably going to have to say a fear of failing, right? Because, when you get up there and you go, how did I get here? I'm an imposter. I need to, I really need, if I need to do anything, I need to learn what the hell I'm doing, right? Because if I don't know and I go out there and I try to build something and put the foundation together and create processes and procedures, like, how do I do that? Granted, you hire a lot of people that are smarter than you that know, but you at least have to it's like in the production business, if you understand the components of each one of the levels below you, you're a good producer. Right? It's the same thing with a leader. It's like the coach of a sports team. You're not the best player on the team, that's for sure, but you understand the elements and you understand how to get them to perform at their best. And the concept is, if I don't even know what I'm talking about, then how am I supposed to get people to what's a vision? What do I do? How do I tell them? I don't even know. Row in what direction? I don't even know what direction they're rowing in. So I think the fear of, okay, I'm here, there's an opportunity. It's not a passing concern. It's a long-term vision. How do I make the best of this? And I think the fear of failing probably drove me there.
And you kind of touched on there, and it was going to be another question, actually. What did you learn in your TV and production career that you took into your business career?
I would say less than I would hoped to, right? Because most of the stuff with TV, here's a beginning, middle, and an end. It's like you go out and say, listen, oh, you need a project, or here's a project, I'm going to sell it to you. And we do pre-production, we do production, and we do post-production, and then, we deliver. Okay, next, right? And it's a bit different than an ongoing concern where you say, listen, structurally, you have to have processes and procedures to know how you're doing. What's the health of the company? Where are you rowing? Where are you going? What's the direction you're taking? What's your mission? That's not always obvious in a production, at least in my opinion, right? So I think what I learned was I needed more structure, right? And I needed better tools to get me to the level that I wanted to get to.
Got it. I know you had quite a few interesting sort of stories that you wanted to share in terms of, the setbacks and the challenges in your business career. So what is the, I suppose, biggest business failure you've had?
I'm probably going to say there were many, but the biggest was probably not getting aware of the legal, getting contracts in place. It kind of goes back to a story. So we had this one competitor that I mentioned that had the exclusives, and we ended up going in and having to upload the images into their system to get to these GDSs that they had the exclusives with. Eventually, now we had multiple lawsuits with them because when they bought the company they had tortious interference, there was all kinds of stuff. So we had an agreement between them of what we could and couldn't do in our respective worlds, right? I never really paid attention to the details of that agreement and, let it go.
When we were getting closer to the end of their exclusives, they locked us out entirely. They put a new element in that said nobody can upload images to our database unless they are actually from the hotel, right? And so we went around that using an IP anonymizer thing, right? We did not go legally. Had we read our contract or our agreement, we would have known that they were in breach of the contract, right? But we went around it and we did something we should not have done. And as a result, they sued us. And after all that was said and done in arbitration, we lost. And there was $1 million settlement to pay their legal bills. I mean, the settlement was probably $10, but the legal bills were ridiculous because that's the way it was. So here we are, no money, and we have $1 million settlement. And I'm literally days away from understanding that this is the end of my business because I don't have the money. I've already taken a line of credit out on my house to pay the employees, right? So I have no money. I have nowhere to get $1 million. I'm screwed, right? So I'm telling this story to one of our distribution partners. He owns many tour operators in the U.S. And he sees the writing on the wall and he says, well, if these guys get their way and they win, they're bullies and there's going to be a monopoly and that's not going to be good for the industry. So he buys equity in my company for the $1 million, gives me the $1 million. We pay the settlement. Within a year, that's just before because they wanted to litigate us out of business. We end up going from the 1,000 hotels to the 22,000 hotels. A few years later, we sell the business. He quadruples his investment. So he did very well. And I was thrilled because somebody just didn't want a bully and saw the writing on the wall and came to our aid. Otherwise, I literally would be asking you, do you want fries with that burger?
That sounds particularly...
It was horrible. Read the contracts, get good lawyers to keep your ass out of trouble. I think that was my takeaway.
But did you have a in-house legal team, or were you getting legal advice?
No, we had a lawyer. We had, lawyers that we used for corporate stuff and litigation stuff. But, it was one of those things where when you're barely able to pay the employees, the last thing you want to do is call a lawyer and get legal advice at, $450 an hour or whatever it was at the time. So I was like, okay, and I didn't bother reading it. And I guarantee if I had ChatGPT at the time, I would have sent some bullet points from the pros of this agreement, right? None of that existed.
And this, from what I heard, you did something that you essentially shouldn't have done.
Yes.
Yes. Do you regret doing that?
No. And I'll tell you why. Because it worked out in the end. Had I read the agreement and known what we had agreed to and understood what my options would have been, I might have been better served. But the fact that these guys were litigious and some of the clients, the big hotel groups, were not thrilled with them anyway, and they were fearing the litigious nature of these guys because they sued a lot of people. It wasn't just us, right? They essentially, they put the writing on the wall. And, after that, we had won, literally when that one was in play, they sued us again for another reason, just to make us think, it's never going to end. We're going to litigate you into bankruptcy, right? And so when we paid that off, we then won the next one. And that's where their board and their VCs said, you know what, we're getting rid of the CEO because all he wants to do is litigate people. And he was let go. So I think, we've done much better since they have. So, I think that's a lesson learned for trying to do things. Listen, a lot of people, this happens every day that people go into lawsuits just to try to get their competitors out of business. Sad because good people get squashed.
But did you, at the time, you said you did an IP workaround. Did you sort of weigh up the risks of that? Like, was there a decision making of sort of, this could go, we could be sued for this, or I know you said you didn't necessarily read the contract. So was there any, or was it just a split sort of, a second decision that you decided to go ahead with that activity?
I'm going to say it was probably more a split second decision and need for survival, because if we didn't do it, we weren't fulfilling the contractual obligation for Starwood, right? And so if we couldn't upload the images where they needed to be, then that business would go away. So it was I don't want to say it was a calculated risk, because we didn't really give it much thought. We thought we don't have a choice, right?
What kind of time period was this over? I mean, I suppose for people that might not have gone through a legal dispute and being sued, what kind of timelines are we talking about here? Because in the UK, those kind of things can rumble on for years.
Oh yeah, years. So, we started when we had the partnership with the one company that was acquired, where they did photos, we did virtual tours, and then we had a contract with another company, IHG, and they essentially didn't pay us. And we went, wait a second, we have a contract, we did the work. And they go, well, that money is ours. And so basically they didn't believe we were going to go to court. So we ended up in court. We were in court 4 times with these guys. We won 3 of them, and they won that one, which, was devastating to me. But through the course of litigation here in the US and drawing it out, years. I mean, that particular one probably happened in 9 months. That was relatively quick. I think the idea for them was, our exclusives are ending soon. We need to ensure that they don't jump in, right? We need to put them out of business. So they changed the rules of the game, if you will. And we went around those rules where we didn't need to if we'd have read the agreement that we had from the first lawsuit, right? And as a result, we lost. And we even said, yeah, well, you should have done that. You should have done that. I'm like, yeah, well, fuck, I didn't know that, right? So it was drawn out over multiple years.
And was it sort of David and Goliath kind of situation in terms of like scale?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were much larger. They had, multiple rounds of VC funding. So they had millions of dollars. And, I had pretty much nothing because we were surviving with, we didn't make a lot of money with Starwood. It was really to keep our foot in that door. We made money producing and distributing virtual tours just to survive and pay for the techies, right? I think I was paying myself less than minimum wage for many years. And we just thought, if we had an opportunity and those exclusives end, we can turn the corner. And that's what we were waiting for. And they knew that. And they figured, listen, if we sue them and they can't make the payment and they go bankrupt, then we win, right? And that was the idea.
And that sounds incredibly, incredibly like scary firstly, to be running a business, which, is, by the sounds of it, is kind of on slim margins until, those exclusives end. And then you've got this huge company essentially threatening to, as you said, sue you out of business.
Correct. And I'm surprised if I look in the mirror that I even have any hair, because there were a lot of times, not literally pulling my hair out, but there were a lot of sleepless nights. There was a lot of stress. There was a lot of sort of thinking, what the hell am I doing? I could be making 3 times this kind of money just working for somebody else and not having to worry about it, and spending 12 hours a day and weekends working to try to make this work.
How did you get through that?
Good alcohol. No, actually, I would say a good wife. She was more stable and, matter of fact. And I think that I could see that there was light at the end of the tunnel. I always knew there was an opportunity, and I knew the nature of these people because I would talk to the clients, the prospective clients at the time, and I knew they weren't really happy. So I knew if somebody else gave them an option, that there would be an opportunity. So there was hope. It wasn't like all dire, like, oh my God, the world is ending. It's kind of like when you talk about the difference between drowning and treading water, right? When you're drowning, you're flailing your arms around, and mentally and physically you believe, oh my God, I'm going to die, right? And eventually over time, when you realize it's okay, you just move, slow down, you move, you can survive. You don't have to,
panic, and you'll survive.
So you were very much in survival mode for many, many years, really.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah. That's why I'm really appreciative now that I, got through it, and I feel incredibly lucky and grateful.
And what was the lowest point of that?
Probably the days before the lawsuit. I owed $1 million and I had no idea where it was going to come from. I mean, literally, I kept thinking, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, I've mortgaged my house to the tilt. I have no money in the bank. The business is about to go down. I didn't have an answer, and I was in freak out, panic mode, drowning.
So did you have any? Well, firstly, when the settlement came in that you lost the lawsuit, how long did you have to pay that $1 million?
Yeah. So what happened was the lawsuit came in. It was sometime in around tax time, and I know this because when I talked to the guy who ultimately bailed us out, he says, "I think I can help you, but I can't now because taxes are due, and I don't have any dry powder, as we call it. I don't have any cash." I'm like, "Oh, okay. What the fuck do I do?" I talked to my lawyer. He goes, "We're not going to win, but you can file for an amendment. That'll extend it for several months." I'm like, "Okay." So we filed for amendment. The amendment went, I think, 5 or 6 months. I don't know the exact time, but so we stretched it out for 5 more months. And then it came and the guy says immediately, "No, this is not worth it. You guys lost. You owe the money. You got 10 days. So once that was agreed upon and the amendment was extended and then ended, it was a 10-day noose, if you will, around my neck. So that was the reality I had. So, once you know it's coming and you're suffering for 6 months, and then okay, now I know an exact date. It's 10 days from now.
And had you been trying to look at your options over that 6-month period and work out, well, if we did lose and we had to pay the $1 million, trying to work out the solutions?
No, I don't like to look and see, all right, what do I do if I fail? I'm like, if I fail, I fail, and then I figure it out. But I don't have the bandwidth and the mental capacity to think of other things while I'm trying to figure that out. And it's not that, we didn't stop doing business and think, all right, well, it's all over. We just kept going on with the belief that, something is going to save us, which, we kind of knew he would help back when he says, "I don't have it now, but you know what? Give me a couple of months." And so we kind of believed, but it wasn't for sure, right? And so it was hanging on by a shoestring.
And you mentioned about not being able to meet payroll at times and having to remortgage your house. Like that again sounds sort of incredibly stressful and difficult. Take us back to those kind of times and the decisions you went through.
So early on when I'm starting the business and I believe, okay, first of all, I can't pay myself for a while because we're going to be paying for the tech guys to build a platform. No money's coming in while money's going out, right? And eventually, as we pivot again to the photo thing and we realize it's going to require more ongoing maintenance, then I have to get money somewhere. And I always say, if I were smart, I would raise money. And if I raised money, I probably would have spent it on stupid things and bankrupted the company because I wasn't that smart at the time. But I knew that I needed to get the money. So I had a house that I bought years earlier. And this is back in the days where they were giving lines of credit for anybody, for anything, right? The pre-subprime days, like the 2006-7, right? So I had a couple $100,000 line of credit on my house, which was great. I didn't want to go to it, but if I needed it, it was there. It was a little bit of peace of mind. And eventually I used most of it up. And then after the mortgage meltdown, the bank came and said, "Okay, well, we're reevaluating our lines of credit. Your credit isn't as high anymore. We're going to take it down. You need to pay us back." And I'm like, "What? Oh my God." So, we ended up with a bigger line of credit, and then they drew it down, and the house hadn't changed. I was in the same place. I hadn't moved. So, I ended up not paying myself for a while just to get others paid. That was the way it was.
And I don't know if it's because, there's a lot of water under the bridge, a lot of years, but it kind of sounds like you were relatively calm about these situations. Was that not the case?
I wish I could say I was. In hindsight, I probably would have looked back and say, I would tell myself, breathe and try to be calmer because all things will work out, right? But in the midst of it, I was a drowning victim. I thought the world was coming to an end. I don't know what to do. Granted, I went to school and I started to understand processes, but when it's just beating you over the head and money is the biggest problem, you kind of wonder, oh my God, Jesus, what the hell? It seems like I probably wasn't as calm as I imagined I should have been. Well, I know I wasn't as calm as I imagined I should have been. It's a, now that I'm older as well, I think, wow, because I had more to lose, Early days, if I made mistakes and did things, like I said, it's not far to fall. In this case, I had a house, I had a wife, I had a family, and, it's a lot more to lose.
And you said about, having a victim mentality. Was that something new to you? Do you ever had that before? Was it just the stress of this situation?
Well, I think the victim mentality is from my mother. My mother was Jewish, German, raised at the time of Hitler. And so they went into hiding, and there was a whole lot of victimization for her entire life. So a lot of that, I imagine, would have permeated into my mindset. Now, the fact that there was a bigger, well-funded company that was bullying us, and they were truly, I want to say bullies. They were real schmucks. So I did have that victim mentality as well. Like, man, it's just not fair. These people are trying to do things with their money, and it's just not fair. So yeah, that was a lot of victim mentality there.
And how did you snap out of that? Because that can be dangerous, right?
It could be very dangerous. I snapped out of it when we finally got the money and paid it off, and then the company said, "We like you. We're gonna bring it on." And we went from 1,000 hotels to 22,000 less than a year. So all of a sudden, we said, "Okay, we built a better system. We have, we built a better mousetrap, if you will. So we now have clients. Breathe. We have money coming in." And, this is a software as a service company, so it's incremental. The margins are huge if you get the numbers. So, after a while, we had 68% net profit. And then you start to breathe and go, okay, the foundation was built, the processes are there, the software is doing what it is, we've got the connections, it's great. And I think it really I don't think I needed to go through that. I think that those hurdles and those mountains helped me appreciate and the gratitude for, where we got to in the end.
And it intrigues me that client who bailed you out, like that feels quite an extreme. Why did he do that?
Well, he told me when he was a kid, he was bullied, and he doesn't like bullies. And he knew that it felt like these guys were being bullies, right? He had to work with them as well to get images for his tour operator companies, and he worked with us as well. So he knew both companies. He also, I guess, was aware business-wise. He was a really good businessman. And he realized that if it was left to the company to put us out of business, the writing on the wall probably meant that he would have had to pay for those images a higher cost, because we didn't charge to deliver the images to the distribution channels. We charged the hotels, right? And the reality was our competitor was trying to do it both ways, charge the hotels to manage and distribute, and charge the distribute to get it in the right specs, right? And so he was like, okay, this is potentially a problem that is in the works, right? He saw the writing on the wall, and he didn't like bullies. At least that's what he told me.
But there's one thing not liking bullies, and there's another one. There's another thing also expecting a higher cost for, software costs and things like that. But there's another thing paying £1 million. Like,
yeah. Well, he also said, I still speak to him regularly. Like I said, I call him and I tell him every year, I'm so grateful for you, and my life is because of you. And he says, I always knew you were like a scrapyard dog. I mean, you're like a dog with a bone. You are not going to quit. You are not going to give up. He knew that about me. And he knew, that's why I went back to school. And that's why I did the things in order to, for the long term, think, okay, let me position myself so if that opportunity were to present itself, that I am prepared, right? And I guess he saw that. So he saw that tenacity and discipline that I had. And he believed that given the right opportunity, that it could be fortuitous.
So he had belief in you more than anything. Was it kind of like an investment in you?
That's what he said. When I asked him, I said, and he says, yeah, I believed in you. I believed in you from day one. I'm like, okay, good man. Thank you.
But obviously then that must have come with a lot of pressure.
Oh, without a doubt. I even said to him, I said, listen, no matter what happens, I don't care if this business goes bankrupt, I will get you paid back in my lifetime. That was my promise to him. And I would have, I don't let this go lightly. I don't want to borrow somebody's money and, sorry, it's lost.
Yeah.
See ya. No, I would have paid him back.
And did you have the belief that he had in you at the time?
Believe that what?
Did you have the same level of belief in yourself that he had in you?
Probably. I don't think I would have continued doing the things in the manner that I did, if I didn't believe, right? I knew what I didn't know, so I went back to school. I knew what I didn't know, so I started building the processes and reading the books and understanding. And, the saying that you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with. So I would try to get involved with entrepreneurs and we would share stories. So you kind of want to understand how to do it right? And like we said early on with YouTube and internet, it's easier to find things that, how do you build business? How do you do that? I think the big problem most of us are missing are, what problem are you solving? Or what problem are you making easier to get solved, right? Because there's no way somebody would say, listen, I have a passion for clothing. I want to open up a boutique on Main Street. Okay, yeah. What is that really a problem, right? I mean, come on. So I think the biggest challenge is, okay, if you have something that you feel that you can solve, a problem that you believe you can solve, all right, how do you do that with, the foundational stuff, the process, the procedure, the culture, the vision, because it all plays in. I mean, even in the beginning when I couldn't afford to pay the employees that I had and I knew they were good, I gave them phantom stock, meaning I said, listen, I plan to sell the company one day. I can't pay you as what I think you're worth. So I'm going to give you a piece of that so that when we sell the company, you get that share, right? And they believed in it. And, several of the key people stayed with me for many years and all did very well when we sold the company.
Again, that's being very smart. It's kind of similar to the sort of decision making when you sold your video game company.
Yeah, I think it's part learning on the job and also the best sort of applications for survival, right? If you look long term, I would say, okay, so if we're going to be here long term, I don't want to keep switching employees. I think these guys are good. I know what they're doing, and I don't want to have to say, what you can get $5 more down the street. No, what will incentivize them? And that was part of my learning process is what ways, besides giving them stock, because you don't necessarily want to give somebody stock if they're liable for losses and gains, but phantom stock is doable. If they leave, they lose it. And we also had it. The other thing that I thought was worthy for the acquirer is the phantom stock would vest over 2 years, meaning I sell the company, they won't get their share. They get tranches every 6 months, but they don't get their money right when the company is sold. Otherwise, see ya, right? And the new company's like, wait a second, I need this. These guys, they have the IP. They would have to wait 2 years to get all their money. And if the company says, I don't want them, then they could get the money right away. It was an escrow. I fire you, you can have the money. So it was a win-win-win because, they got more money, they got to stay with the company, they got their security on the company, got the people who were, know the day-to-day running the company.
Yeah, very good structure. Looking back over that challenge and, that David and Goliath situation, Was there anything that you look back on, you think, that was a mistake and you wish you'd done differently?
Beside the not reading the contracts and the legal stuff, I don't think so. Part of the stuff that happened because it was a learning process, right? Even that, as I mentioned, had they not done what they did, they probably wouldn't have shown the industry their true colors, because listen, it's a small industry. There's 70 some odd companies that have management or representation for the 100,000 plus hotels around the world, right? It's that simple. So if you can get 70 companies, that's all the clients you need. But they talk, they know, they're at conferences, they know what the options are, and they can see that one company is being a bit obnoxious, suing people, egregiously raising prices without care, horrible customer service. So there's an opportunity there. And so you kind of look at that and you say, all right, would I have done it differently? Yeah, I probably would have learned what to do early on and tried to thwart the exclusives. But because they acquired another company, they had 2 GDSs, the other company had 2 GDSs. It was a natural marriage, made sense, but they knew how to raise money and they knew how to do that.
And in terms of the reading the contracts and the legal stuff, like, what could you have done? Literally just outsource that to a lawyer? Would it have been as simple as that?
Probably. I mean, when you have a settlement agreement with, 80 pages worth of crap, even if you read all that, you're not going to remember that stuff years later, which is exactly what happened. It happened years later. And I didn't remember the details of the agreement, and I never bothered going back to look.
What did that whole challenge and difficult period sort of teach you kind of about business and I suppose what perspectives did it give you about life in general?
Perseverance. That your mind creates who you are, right? And if you believe and you keep trying and you're sort of disciplined, it may not be succeed in the way you some people, if I make a lot of money, I have success. Success is different, right? Wealth and money can be completely 2 different concepts, right? But I think what it helped teach me was the appreciation for, I got here, I did what I needed to do in order to just breathe and then do what I want to do now, right? I always knew when I sold the company, there was another chapter of my life that I want to pursue, and I can do that without stressing. I think it minimizes the stress. You know what I mean? You wake up and you're thinking, okay, I can get into my old age and I don't have to worry about living in a studio apartment or whatever, living on the street and not getting the food. Okay, I'm fine, right? And I'll tell you, one of the ironies was when I sold the company, I had a number on my mirror for a decade. So I knew exactly what I needed to get to sell the company, right? And the number was simply a derivative of what do I need to live the rest of my life comfortably, not like with yachts and private planes and stuff, but comfortable without stressing and not having to go in and make money off the money, like interest and stuff. What do I need? Okay, double that amount because, you never know what the hell happens. And that was my number. And that was what was on the mirror. And then when I went to sell the company and they said, listen, we're interested. I said, yeah, but I don't think I'm there yet. I ended up getting the number simply because I was in a position of strength at the time.
Wow. Was that on purpose, putting that number in? Are you very much into sort of visualization and, the universe kind of, the stuff that's in the, in that book that I can't remember the title of, The Secret?
Oh, yeah, exactly. There's a bunch of them, but I think a little of both. I mean, I think that one, I knew practicality wise, what do you need? I mean, what's your expenses now? And what do you really need to be comfortable? And then double that. That was it. It was as simple as that. So then you would put it on your mirror so that you could visualize it every day. So you're clearly knowing the direction you're heading and where the end goal is financially, that is, right? So that's how it came about.
we were talking offline, and you said something interesting, which is you were talking about the misleading concept of overnight success. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that, many people that start businesses, they look at the world in this sort of dreamy setting of, listen, I'm going to start my business and they will come, right? And then I'll be a millionaire, or, I'll sell it for a boatload of money. Like they'll read the people at Instagram built a business, 13 months later, they sold it for $1 billion. Yeah. Yeah, it's possible if lightning strikes a bottle multiple times, but it's far from the norm. It's very much the exception, right? And you can talk to a lot of people about their journeys, and most of them will say, yeah, it was an overnight success after 2 decades or whatever, right? So the truth is, there are very, very, very few businesses that start and get catapulted to overnight stardom. Now, it seems like the cycle gets shorter and shorter with technology. You throw a lot of money at a company like OpenAI, and, they build stuff because they spend a lot of money. And then next thing you know, they're a multi-trillion-dollar company or whatever, right? $150 billion company. Seems like overnight. I don't know how many years they were building, and they were probably, scientists or, tech data scientists working on this for a decade or more before it became an overnight success. But many, many businesses, tech or not, take a while to gestate.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue with the focus and the coverage of companies like Instagram, because that is 0.001 of stories and businesses out there. And the fact, obviously it's a great inspiring story, but it's not the norm.
Exactly. And listen, I have this conversation all the time where I say, listen, and you're right. If you look at the stats and you know that 90% of businesses fail within the first 5 years, startups, right? You're like, wow, that's harsh. And you think, not me, I'm special. I'm one of the 10%. I'm not going to fail, right? But the truth of the matter is, if you want to find that opportunity, you need to be prepared, right? And you need to be lucky. Because if you're prepared and you're not lucky, you may not see opportunity. If you're lucky and you're not prepared, you may not see opportunity, right? If you look at the world and you say, look, I'm a pretty lucky guy, I'm just going to sit here and wait for somebody to come knocking on my door. Good luck, right? Prepare and do as much as you can to position yourself to where opportunity will find you, right?
So kind of wrapping up, so a couple of final questions. What advice would you give to listeners who have experienced a significant setback or challenge or failure within their business?
Breathe. At the end of the day, I think that the first is, okay, relax. This too shall pass. Do you have a roof? Do you have food? Do you have shelter? Do you have security? Are you healthy? Okay. Now that all of the basic stuff's not, you're not going to die, right? What can I learn from this? Right? Where can I take this to my benefit? Why did this happen? Right? Kind of a little dissected of it, right? It's not easy to do when you're in the midst of it and you think the world is coming to an end, but breathe and then think, all right, what do I need to do to figure out why this happened or to pivot, right?
And what about how, because it's a lot, everything you said today, a lot of the things you've talked about, mindset and things like that. And you mentioned the word perseverance, and what is it that they can do to get through those periods?
Discipline. I'll tell you, one of the things that I think helped me a lot was I would swim. I would literally take my lunch breaks. Oh, somebody said that. I would take my lunch break and I would go swim. I would do laps. I would clear my mind. I would end up thinking through different issues, right? And I would come back and I would feel better. I'd feel more invigorated, and I'd end up going, work out, walk, swim, go to the gym. I don't care, but
Get your mindset out of the day-to-day. And swimming's really boring. I mean, you're really not looking at anything exciting. You're not listening to anything exciting. It's a black line on the thing. So you're really working through and meditatively breathing, breathe, and it's rhythmic. So it helped me a lot with that discipline of just get out of your mind for the moment and go somewhere else. And I think that the other challenge is when you're overstressing yourself and you walk away, if you're constantly thinking about it, constantly dealing with it, it's going to consume you. Walk away, work out, get out of it. Whether any workout that you feel comfortable doing that you can do regularly.
That's great advice.
By dealing with it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I go for a walk in local park or nature. That always sort of helps me to get out of that negative spiral, negative loops. So final question, if you could go back in time and erase that lawsuit from ever happening and ever being, you were never sued, would you do that?
I know we alluded to, probably shown their true colors and, give some sight. And I probably would say yes. I think the stress and the aggravation I could have done away with. So I probably would have. Had we ended up in the same place? Probably. I know we had a better product and we had figured it out. So those exclusives would have ended regardless because we told the clients, the hotel groups, to tell the GPSs, the Sabres of the world, hey, we need an option. You guys are not giving us any options. So they knew they were going to unwind anyway. So I would say, yeah, I would have blown it up and not have it happen.
Well, I mean, as you say, you came out well in the end, but as you say, you might have had a few more hairs.
Yeah.
So we always end with a quick fire round, which is short questions and short answers. Question 1: failure is
a learning opportunity.
What's your life's mission?
Right now, it's the production of a series that we're doing for TV. That's my next chapter. So that's the current mission. And that's what I started 40 years ago with what I wanted to do.
Going full circle. What's one piece of advice you'd want to give to people on your deathbed?
Your mind creates your life.
What's one habit that keeps you resilient?
Swimming.
If you could be immortal and live forever, would you take it and why?
No, because I think that you wouldn't appreciate the time that you have and it would all sort of blend in and then what's the point? And, not to say I don't believe that maybe there's another reincarnation or we go to another metaverse or whatever, but at least there's a beginning, middle, and end. So there's a journey and journeys have beginning, middle, and end. If the journey doesn't end, I would say, well, what's the point?
Is that your TV hat coming in there?
It's called slipping, which is slipping through time.
If you could swap places with another business person in the world, who would it be?
Another business person, he's pretty much gone now, but it was Wayne Huizenga. And I always had a lot of respect for Wayne Huizenga, primarily because he was such a good businessman. He didn't start one business that blew up. He did multiple businesses from Blockbuster to Waste Management to AutoNation. So he was a true business mind as opposed to, listen, I came up with this great idea. I started this software company and it's just blown up. Granted, he's done it multiple times in multiple Fortune 500 companies. So respect. Wayne Huizenga.
Is there a book about him at all?
I don't know. There should be.
Should be. Maybe that's your next project.
Yeah. Question.
Is there anyone you could recommend you think I should have on as a guest?
There's a couple of people. I would think Joel Gandara, who's a friend of mine here in South Florida. Happy to introduce.
Yeah, great. Please.
Yeah. A couple others that I think would do well. Absolutely.
Perfect.
And I'll send you some.
Great. So, Henry, where can people find you and connect with you?
Probably the best place is I have a website called mariethestory.com, which talks about the book that I just published that my father wrote. That's a whole other story.
that is then being developed into the series Slippin'. So there's things about me, things about my father, and things about the series Slippin'. And then there's links to LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, so they can always get in touch. So if you go to mariethestory.com, there's the information, and then obviously where to buy the book as well.
Perfect. I'll put all that out in the show notes. When's the TV series meant to be out?
Damn, if I knew that, I'd be a richer man. TV, this is a world that I probably would never get into in business because the 1% make money and it's a lot of effort. And it's one of those things that it's a passion project of mine that I wanted to do since 40 years ago. So I will do it because I can. But if it happens in a couple of months, great. If it happens in a couple of years, that's the way it is. I mean, the production world has slowed down dramatically in the last year or so because of streamers at one point throwing money at all kinds of stuff and now realizing, wait, we need to take a step back, right? I also look at that world and wonder what's going to happen in the coming years with artificial intelligence, right? The fact that you can do great images with text. Now imagine text to video, which is happening, and what that's going to do to budgets and creative. And I think Hollywood is afraid of that because a lot of people are going to be losing their jobs. So they're afraid to jump into it, but people will it's going to happen. How and when and what part of it I'm involved in will happen. We'll find out soon enough.
Well, good luck with it, and look forward to seeing it come out at some point, whenever that may be. So, Henry, thanks so much for your time today. Really enjoyed the kind of conversation and the different avenues and paths and your fascinating kind of life and career. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thanks for those great questions. I appreciate it. You're awesome.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Fail. Really hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Please do subscribe to the show and leave us a review. It really does help us to grow and to reach more people. Do follow us on social media too. We're at Jeswood on Instagram and at Beyond the Fail on YouTube and also on Linktree. Thanks again and see you soon.